Welcome to Arlington National Cemetery's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial Commemoration Lecture Series. My name is Allison Finkelstein, and I serve as Arlington's senior historian. For this episode, we have two featured experts, Rebecca L. Stevens and Caitlin Smith. Architect Rebecca L. Stevens served as the first ever Cultural Resource Manager for Arlington National Cemetery, and previously served as the Chief Historical Architect for the National Park Service National Capital Region. After practicing architecture throughout the country with the Park Service, she continued her career in a private architecture firm. Ms. Stevens is a graduate of the University of Cincinnati's School of Design, Art, Architecture, and Urban Planning with a professional architecture degree, and she is a registered architect in California, Colorado, and Maryland. Caitlin Smith is the current Cultural Resource Manager and Conservator at Arlington National Cemetery. At Arlington, she focuses on the preservation and rehabilitation of 19th through 21st century historic structures, commemorative works, and artifacts. Prior to this, she worked for several private conservation firms. Ms. Smith holds a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's in historic preservation and political science from the University of Mary Washington. She is a professional associate of the American Institute for Conservation. In their episode, titled Preserving the Past for the Future, Ms. Smith and Ms. Stevens examine the architectural history and evolution of Memorial Amphitheater and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They share the methods employed by the cemetery to maintain them, and they explore how traditional construction methods are combined with innovative science and technology to protect and preserve these historic properties. We hope you enjoy this behind-the-scenes explanation of how, for more than 150 years, careful stewardship has preserved these monumental structures for future generations.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Stevens, the former Cultural Resource Manager at Arlington National Cemetery, and I'm with
Caitlin Smith, the current Cultural Resource Manager and Conservator at Arlington National Cemetery.
Caitlin was our conservator during the time we gave this talk, and I have now retired, so that's why I'm former and she's current. And we're here today to talk about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial, and also how the Memorial Amphitheater relates to the tomb, and how Arlington National Cemetery over time has been the stewards of both the structure and the tomb, and talk about what's changed and what hasn't and what we do. So we are reprising the talk we gave for the centennial of the Tomb of the Unknown, and the title of my talk was Preserving Arlington National Cemetery's Historic Resources for Another 100 Years of Service. Memorial Amphitheater and the Tomb of the Unknown seem unchanged over time, but the amphitheater, its grounds, and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier are continually changing. A little over 100 years ago, the land on which the amphitheater sits was a stone quarry site, with the USS Maine and Spanish-American War memorials rising as lone sentinels in this part of the cemetery. As stated in the Historic American Building Survey History of Memorial Amphitheater, bear with me here, the Memorial Amphitheater and adjacent Tomb of the Unknown Soldier are significant as both the centerpiece of Arlington National Cemetery's efforts to memorialize and honor America's war dead, and as a premier example of American Beaux-Arts design. The Memorial Amphitheater was conceived originally in the early 1900s, when it became clear that the 1873 James R. Tanner Amphitheater was insufficient in both size and grandeur to continue hosting the annual Memorial Day ceremonies and other events. The Arlington Memorial Amphitheater Commission was formed in 1908, although the legislation authorizing construction of the amphitheater was not passed until 1913, and the cornerstone was not laid until 1915. Poor weather, supply issues, and World War I further delayed construction, and the amphitheater was not completed until 1920. The Memorial Amphitheater was designed by Thomas Hastings of the renowned architecture firm Carrara and Hastings, whose best-known work is the New York Public Library. Hastings' design is a masterwork of American Beaux-Arts architecture. He intended the building to be very classic in character and at the same time in the spirit of the early colonial architecture of the country, making it appropriate for its time and purpose. Hastings later claimed that he would prefer to be remembered for Memorial Amphitheater over all of his other buildings. So that's the background on the building's design and construction, how it came to be. So in 1920, as conceived and built, there was no plans for a burial or monument to honor unknown soldiers at the amphitheater. You can see that in original construction drawings and in the 1919 and 1920 aerial photographs of the completed structure. These photographs can be found at the National Archives online sources. By 1921, the unknown soldier was buried beneath a marble sarcophagus at the primary entrance to the amphitheater. The tomb was placed on the center line of a symmetrical composition which extended through the amphitheater from the U.S. Capitol to the USS Maine Memorial. One approached the tomb from grand staircases in the retaining wall to the east of the amphitheater, or by descending the 1920s portico stairs on the east front of the reception building, then called the Trophy Room, and across the original road to the amphitheater. Burial of the unknown soldier with replacement of the sarcophagus is the first major change to Memorial Amphitheater, occurring just 1 year after the structure's dedication. The burial of the unknown soldier is a small physical change to the amphitheater, but it transformed its purpose. Built as a gathering place for a once-a-year Memorial Day observances, with the unknown's burial, the amphitheater converted to a place of daily ceremonies to honor those unknown individuals who gave their lives for the country. Aerial photographs from 1922 in the National Archives show the amphitheater and the original marble sarcophagus, grand stairs, and access road. If you reference those images, you'll see a car parked right in front of the amphitheater. That's how you'll know the change. In 1932, the most notable physical changes to Memorial Amphitheater grounds took place. After a lengthy design, approval, and funding period from 1921 to 1930, the Quartermaster General of the Army, Commission of Fine Arts, and Congress approved architect Lorimer Rich's design for the new vehicular and pedestrian approaches to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and a new tomb monument. A number of these things were needed because of additional vehicular traffic to the cemetery and the public outcry or concern that the Tomb of the Unknown was too simple, and they wanted something more to mark the place. So in 1930, the Quartermaster General awarded the construction of monumental steps to the tomb in the place of the retaining wall and double set of steps from the lower to upper plazas. New approach roads to accommodate the increased vehicular traffic in the cemetery. A tree-lined mall from the new approach road, now known as Roosevelt Drive, to the base of the monumental steps. Roosevelt Plaza with a granite fountain, gravel, granite, and blue stone walks with benches, and they awarded a contract for planting of hundreds of trees and shrubs. In 1929, the War Department signed the contract for the construction of the tomb monument, the monument we know as the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Hegeman Harris Company, their stone supplier and subcontracted carvers, completed the tomb monument by Memorial Day, 1932. Arlington National Cemetery established grave sections, erected monuments, and filled in the landscape surrounding the amphitheater after this period. As the burial sections around the amphitheater changed in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, so too did the setting and atmosphere of the amphitheater and its grounds. The amphitheater evolved from a temple-like structure on a hill with a formal landscape design to a marble building in an informal wooded area. During these years, our records show stewardship of the structure and the tomb involved periodic maintenance. The Army made temporary changes to host ceremonies and provide for safety. For example, they erected canvas awnings at the west portico to protect dignitaries from the elements. By the 1970s, visitation to the cemetery increased, accommodating the greater number of visitors to view the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier necessitated changes to the amphitheater. Those were replacing the reception building's east exterior staircase with an elevated viewing terrace, which wraps around the north, east, and south side of the building, constructing bridges linking the west amphitheater area to the viewing terrace, creating offices for the old guard under the viewing terrace, improving and expanding the electrical system, upgrading public restrooms, removing the original and 1930s formal landscape and roads to increase and improve pedestrian paths and create naturalistic and decorative plantings. Comparing aerial photographs taken before 1973, one can see the massive change to Memorial Amphitheater from the additions of the viewing terraces and the redesigned grounds. This is the way the building appears now. In the 1990s, condition of the exterior stone prompted Arlington National Cemetery to address marble erosion. The cemetery replaced marble pieces such as railing balustrades, which were eroded due to the effects of acid rain and aggressive cleaning regimens. Arlington National Cemetery repaired storm drain lines running in the wall from the roof through the building. They installed bird netting on the east portico. By the early 2000s, leaks from the stage and poor drainage at the lower amphitheater into the chapel led to rebuilding the stage's wall to improve storm drainage and waterproofing. The change blocks daylight into the chapel. Nearly every decade saw major renewal projects for Memorial Amphitheater. The cemetery performed periodic cleaning of the exterior marble and semi-annual cleaning of the seating and tomb plaza after World War II and 2010. Records indicate the cemetery used water pressure blasting and maybe sandblasting to keep the marble looking white. These practices accelerated erosion of the marble. By 2010, the cemetery adopted universally accepted preservation practices to extend the life of the amphitheater. In short, they are using the gentlest means first, treatments must be reversible, and to do no harm to the structure. Maintaining these resources without harm requires Arlington National Cemetery to blend old technologies with new ones to preserve what makes the resources special. In 2014, the Arlington National Cemetery launched a multi-year project in partnership with the National Park Service to preserve and restore the amphitheater's original marble doors and windows and improve universal access. The most ambitious work involved reducing the stains caused by dark-colored biofilm. Biofilm is a combination of algae, bacteria, and fungus that clings to weathered marble and over time develops resistance to cleaning products. Tests on Memorial Amphitheater led to a 5-year monitoring and documentation project to determine the most effective methods of reducing biofilm. Based on testing and DNA analysis, ANC selected zinc oxide as the most effective, least damaging, and environmentally safe treatment. Arlington National Cemetery photographs by Elizabeth Fraser show the before, during, and after zinc oxide treatment on the amphitheater and the Tomb of the Unknown. From 2018 to 2021, the cemetery embarked on 20 different projects to preserve the amphitheater and its grounds for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial and for the amphitheater's long-term preservation. Some of the projects were continuation of the door, window, and hardware restoration, zinc oxide cleaning, marble and granite repointing and repair, bird net replacing, bronze railing repatination, universal access ramp to the main amphitheater level, box seats conversion for universal access, rust removal from the tomb plaza and ledger stones, resetting granite plaza pavers, and replanting the tree allée. Over the last 100 years, the amphitheater's use and physical form have changed. Despite the many changes, the building retains its architectural character and integrity because of thoughtful stewardship. A person from 1920 would recognize the amphitheater of 2021. Preservation of Memorial Amphitheater means engaging with the changes that are sure to come, not stopping them. As today's stewards, the cemetery's goal is to maintain the amphitheater in a manner that assures it is unimpaired for future generations to honor those who served our country. Now it's time for Caitlin.
So thank you for that. When I joined the cemetery about 2.5 years ago, and Rebecca took me under her wing, my job was to help the team physically implement our preservation and conservation goals. So some of those projects Rebecca touched on. I'm going to dive into just a little bit deeper into the actual techniques we used, the tools we used, and what our staff actually were able to accomplish in-house. So Rebecca mentioned that our work really began 2 years before the centennial. It really began with the commemorations for the Memorial Amphitheater. And as she said, we were doing all kinds of repairs to the building, a lot of different masonry repairs, the addition of the ADA ramp, the biofilm treatment. And I got to assist with some of that and training our own staff in-house in addition to contractors and how to apply those treatments to the building. And my job going forward will be to continue to monitor those treatments because none of this is really done and over or static. You know, as stewards of the cemetery, it's really our job to continue these into the future. And part of being good stewards is documenting our work so that future generations can come back and see what we did and they can judge us for the good and the bad. And so we can track the effectiveness of our treatments and adjust as needed. And as part of that, and this is a project Rebecca started with the National Park Service, part of that was actually partnering with a local high school, the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. We're still in touch with them. It's been a little harder. All this work, if you don't know, really these last 2 years occurred all through a pandemic. But one of the projects that's still ongoing is students from the high school, locals, have been coming to study the biofilm. What is it? And it's been a great outdoor classroom for them to put skills they're learning at school into use in the field and see how they're practical in real world in jobs like ours as cultural resources and conservation program managers. And there are some of the great partnerships we're lucky enough to have with outside groups and agencies. So that's one project that's still ongoing. Some other things we did leading up to these two centennials, we did remove a memorabilia box, what we would now call a time capsule, from a cornerstone on the amphitheater. That was quite a thing, especially during a pandemic, to try to organize that effort with our teams and what limited resources we had, and to find ways to document that process so that those who couldn't be with us could still see what we were doing and what we discovered. And so we did open these copper boxes that had been put into the amphitheater more than 100 years ago when it was first constructed, and open them up and reveal the documents inside, everything that was still in really good condition, really shocking. And it was quite a scary project for me, my first time capsule opening. When we opened the memorabilia box, there were a lot of common objects and papers from the day, a program from the cornerstone laying, a signed photo of President Woodrow Wilson. But honestly, one of the most meaningful items was the phone book that was in there, because the person I was opening the time capsule with, our historian, Tim Frank, is actually a local. And he actually found one of his relatives in the phone book. And so for us, it really brought it home. It really brought that connection. It's much less abstract when you think about history, when you can find that personal connection. So the fact that he could open this phone book that had been in the memorabilia box for more than 100 years and find his own relative in there was pretty meaningful. And for me, I look for things like, when I look at the copper boxes, and I think about the people who, just like staff like us, who are just doing their job, and you can still see their fingerprints on the outsides. To me, that's pretty special. So we do our own little touches. You know, my letter I snuck in, maybe my fingerprints are on the box. But
That's in the new box.
In the new box, yeah. In the new time capsule, you know, it was interesting to put it together in the midst of the pandemic. So one of the unique things that's in there is, of course, a mask, sort of representing the time in which it was put together. I mean, for me, one of the very strange things about putting together a new time capsule that's intended to be opened in 100 years is it's very odd to put together an object that you really know is meant to outlive you, that is really meant to be opened by people after you are probably long gone. And I will never know if I succeeded, but I hope I did my job right, and that I properly conserved and preserved everything inside, and that they will still look pristine when they open it, but I will likely never know the results of my work. So that was one of many projects leading up to the centennials. We've already talked about treating the black biofilm. One of the great things I was able to do in the 2 years leading up to the centennials was, with help from Rebecca and the National Park Service, we were able to start a conservation internship program. And so for a couple months in the summer and fall, we were able to bring in young students and early career professionals to come help accomplish conservation projects at the cemetery. And so we did things like refinishing bronze railings around the amphitheater, reducing the standing on the Roosevelt Fountain, rehabilitating the Woodhull flagpole. And so this was really a great chance for us to achieve a lot of our own goals while also helping further our early professionals in their careers and get them excited about working in the government and about working in conservation. And it's just another one of those great partnerships that we were able to tie into the centennial. Other things we did on the Tomb Plaza, in-house we partnered with our different teams, facilities maintenance And the metal shop here, we were able to rehabilitate one of the old guard booth boxes and do all kinds of metal repairs and put new covers on it. Since that's pretty high profile, it's in all the shots right behind the tomb, though most people don't think about it. So that was another project we worked on. In addition to reducing staining on the granite plaza, and we reduced staining on those 3 marble ledger stones that mark the other tombs adjacent to the Tomb of the Unknown. And I also want to take a chance to thank the National Park Service and the Historic Preservation Training Center for all their contributions. They help support the internship program, but it's also their wood crafting team that rehabilitated all those wood doors and windows, and their masons who did all the Dutchman repairs to the marble ledger stones. And for those who don't know, Dutchman repairs, these are really highly skilled repairs where the masons, they carefully cut out and remove damaged sections of stone, then they carve new replacement pieces, and they carefully match the color and texture of the stone, and then they seamlessly install the pieces to make the stone whole again, and hopefully when we've done our jobs right, you never know it was done. But now the ledger stones once again look pristine, and they, we want to properly honor those soldiers that those tombs represent.
I think one of the great accomplishments there with the Dutchman repair on the ledger stones is that you can't see where the repairs are, and the stones look pretty bad before.
You did.
And I feared that our leadership and the Army would want to pull those stones and just replace them with new ones. And of course, new stones really don't have the emotional depth and history and feeling that it gives people. A new stone would be a new stone, but the old stone that's been there really talks to people. So the fact that we were able to save it, I think, was a big accomplishment.
Yeah, it's always one of the push and pulls in our field. We want to maintain what an object represents and how it was meant to be perceived. So things like the Memorial Amphitheater was meant to be this white temple on a hill, therefore we came up with ways to treat and reduce that black biofilm without making it look new or replacing anything. The same idea, it's the same push-pull we often have with grave markers, is we want them to be legible, we want them to represent the person well, be respectful, but there is something special about being able to touch and visit the same object that people have been mourning at and celebrating at for 100 years. There is something special about that. And that's the same thing with the tomb itself. There was talk at one point about replacing the tomb when people started seeing cracks develop around the outside. You want the tomb to represent the right things, and so cracks are unseemly. It seems like the tomb might fall apart. And so there was talk about it, but then there was also public outcry, and there was pushback that, no, this is the tomb. We should take the time and the effort to try to save it. And that's what happened. And back in 2011, 2011 is when the most recent repair campaigns were done, and that's when all these outside groups were pulled together to study the tomb, and we had engineers look at it, and we had architects look at it, and we had conservation scientists look at it.
Geologists looked at it. Yeah. Everybody had a piece of it.
Yeah, and then in the end they were able to come up with solutions, and they're all temporary fixes. They all have to be maintained. That's part of why we have here on staff a maintenance team, a cultural resources program, a conservation program. It's because it's the whole effort. It's a maintenance effort. It never stops. So all those experts were able to come together and come up with creative solutions, and those were implemented last in 2011. And so then it was my job, come 2021, to mostly replicate those repairs. We did some small tweaks, but for the most part, we relied a lot on what those experts had spent, 1 to 2 years studying. And so I, with the interns in September of 2021, came together, and in the dead of night, We crept to the tomb. No, working at the cemetery always requires it requires careful consideration and sometimes some negotiation and talking to the other stakeholders. And one of the big stakeholders, well, one is the public, and not wanting to interrupt the public's opportunity to visit the cemetery and to connect with the tomb. We don't want to interrupt events and ceremonies, and we don't want to interrupt the old guard and the sentinels. So it was decided that all the work on the tomb itself would be done at night, which does complicate things. There are things we have to do then to prepare ourselves. We have a lot of lights, a lot of headlamps, and there's a lot of preparation ahead of time to make sure things go smoothly. So we made all our grout and mortar mixes in the weeks leading up. And then the interns and I went out, and in 1 week, all at night, under the guard's watchful eye, we did our repairs. And we took into consideration other things, that the other concerns of the guard. We always pay our respects when we visit the tomb. So we pause before we enter the plaza. Since we're civilians, we put our hands over our hearts. If you're in service, you would salute the tomb. So those are sort of practices, cultural practices that we incorporate into our scientific treatments. So there's a lot of considerations you take when doing conservation treatments. It's not straightforward. You take into account the stakeholders, you take into account the cultural practice, you take into account what it is we value, and why we are treating it, and what is it we are trying to preserve. So with all that said, the tomb was in pretty good shape. We did some really thorough documentation, took lots of photographs before we began. We measured any cracks to monitor if they had expanded at all over time. And what we found was we felt everything was pretty stable, that the cracks had not changed since 2011. And so knowing that, we did some gentle cleaning. We did some spot biofilm treatment. We removed any existing grout from the cracks and then replaced it with a new grout of the same type. We removed existing mortar from the joints. We replaced it with mortar of the same type. We did insect and debris removal. We reattached loose marble fragments. And really that was it. And by the end, once we tooled all the repairs and color matched them, when you step back, if we do our jobs right, you never know we were there. The tomb looks whole. It still looks aged, but it looks appropriate. And I think we succeeded for now, and we will keep monitoring it. That's our job, and probably in another couple years, if I'm lucky, maybe 5 or 10, but probably sooner, it'll be time again to re-up the repairs.
But certainly the 2010-11 repairs, or filling in of the cracks and other repairs, were meant only to last like 5 or 6 years, and they did very well. They had held up for 10 years. 10, 11 years. So I would think once a decade, the cemetery will have to come back and redo, filling in the cracks and documenting. But what is good to know is the crack hasn't expanded. That was first, I found records that show the crack was first discovered in the 1950s, the mid-50s. And they've been watching it grow over time and getting more and more concerned. So the fact that it's stabilized and hasn't progressed is good news for the health of the tomb.
Yeah. Well, and you said earlier one of the tenets of our field of cultural resources and preservation is reversibility. That's really the ideal standard, so that, because we don't always know today the science and technology of tomorrow, and if we are using the best methods, plus the thought behind why you might do a treatment might change. Or whether you should have interfered at all might change. That's really the standard, though it's not always possible. So the next best thing is the gentlest means, reversibility, and making your repairs sacrificial. So for us, masonry, mortar, and grout repairs tend to be the sacrificial element. Our goal is to make repairs that are softer than the material we're repairing. So our grout and our mortar should be softer than the marble of the tomb. And ideally they fail before the tomb does, and then we go back and periodically refill. So it's not a concern that these materials don't last forever. I would rather they fail and that it's the tomb that stays whole, and that we don't use materials that are too hard or that aren't breathable, and therefore water gets trapped inside the tomb. So these are some of the considerations we take when we're designing a treatment.
And I hope those who are listening go look at the images that we've both referred to, because there's quite a bit of photographs on the tomb, as well as the development and changes of the amphitheater. It really makes our talks mean more if you can see the images.
Or even better, if you can come visit the cemetery.
Oh, that's true. And
But
see how we did.
Yeah, but not, that's not always possible. So the cemetery really tries to make things accessible. We put as much as we can online, so that wherever you are in the world, you too can join us and help celebrate with us.